My question is about housing. Many young people can't afford to live in their accommodations as the rents are too high. Does your party have any policy to change this in the successful next general election?
Dutch, do you want to start off with this one?
Yeah, I mean, I'd always say never have blind faith in any politician, you know, always examine the records. For me personally, what I work towards is not bailing out the banks. I mean, the biggest thing we can reduce the cost of housing in this country is to stop giving them free money from taxpayers, period. Within my party, there's a fight going on between the people like me who wouldn't bail out the banks and the people who might do. As yet, there's nothing set in stone. But I think, again, immigration is an issue. A friend of mine, he's looking for, in Leicester at the minute, there's a lot of people coming in. He was trying to rent a house, 500 quid a month, that's his budget. There's not a lot around, there's a lot of pressure at that level, at the £500 bottom entry level for two up, two down. And they're going the day after they're put on. So that's a thing, you know, again, with immigration, if we're going to manage it properly, we should create the houses first and then bring people in to fill them instead of doing it the other way around. And then you get a situation where you've got 10 people in a house, you know, because they can't afford to live on their own. And so that would be my solution, would stop bailing out the banks. However, I think broader politicians are in bed, Westminster's in bed with the banking sector, and it's going to be very hard to dislodge them.
Housing. So local housing. So I mean, for us, for example, for the Greens, we've said that this coming Parliament, starting from May onwards, we're going to build 500,000 homes, but importantly, affordable homes, not the sort of the ones that the upper market or the upper echelons of people who get 60,000 to 70,000 pounds a year in terms of salaries can afford, but those who perhaps get 10 to 15, and importantly, those who go to councils and those that need them, who can then distribute them effectively at very low levels of rent to those who absolutely need them. And in terms of, I know people will say, oh, Natalie Bennett made a bit of a balls, and is it in terms of the calculations? Well, we know it's going to cost 80 billion, and we know how we're going to get it, because one of the things we're going to do is actually get rid of all the tax relief that you get from the buy to let. And that itself, just on a yearly basis, would generate £5.8 billion. So just within 5 years, it'll almost pay for itself.
Thank you. I'm going to speak about a little bit, I know, about the government policy and the experience I've got as a council with housing, because I think that might give you a little bit of background to the housing situation at the moment. Government have put in place a Help to Buy scheme. That's buy. I didn't buy property till I was 34. It was a little one-bedroom flat in central London. And to be honest with you, I'm going to be absolutely frank with the question. You have to be creative with your housing. You have to share with people. You have to rent a place together. You can split the rent. I mean, society builds us up, and I think our party's been guilty of it under Margaret Thatcher. The individual was everything. I think now the community is everything. And I know people, when I was young, we all shared. So we all were there to try and, if you like, divide the bills, maybe between 2 or 3. Housing policy, in terms of housing, you've got the availability of land. That has to come forward to be built on, so people have to give up the land to build. There's not a lot of land. Each party represented here in front of you has promised to build either 200,000 homes for the Conservative and the Liberal Democrat, I think Labour, 300,000. But then the question is where you put it, and it's the availability of land where that's put. And within every housing scheme, look, the housing is based upon local authorities. They should have a percentage of affordable housing, but that's affordable for who? And that's why what you're talking about, the rental sector, within that, you've got registered social landlords, you've got housing providers of the housing associations. You do have to go onto lists for that and wait for your name to come to the top, or with particular needs, perhaps young families that are higher up than a single male or single female. So there are different ways around the housing market. but you needed perhaps advice how to get around that market. Because ultimately, the rented sector is a private sector market, so it's a supply and demand. But as I say, you've got to use your knowledge of the community and your friends to maybe navigate your way through that.
We've sort of, the big pledges that Labour have got about this are it's sort of split up into two sections. Into sections of people that are going to buy their house and the sections of people that rent their house. So for people that rent, we've promised to scrap agency fees. I, as a student, when I purchased my student rent and digs with my mate, we both had to pay a set of agency fees, and the landlord has to pay a set of agency fees. So the agency is grabbing 3 lots of fees from us for renting one property, and we think that's just wrong. It shouldn't be hitting both of us. It shouldn't be hitting us, the tenants, and the landlord. It's not fair on the landlord, it's not fair on the tenants. So we think agencies are clawing too much out of this for the renting business. So we'd abolish agency fees. They're not needed. Paying £300 for the agency to process your application is just a good way for the agency to get £300 from each of the players in the deal. So we think that's wrong. We think that renting properties that are substandard, that landlords that get away with renting out damp properties for quite high money. I mean, you were saying like the £500 mark is where loads of people are trying to get in, and there isn't anywhere because they're just snatched up so quickly, and that's really bad. And we want to make sure that everyone's got a fair chance of renting something, but renting decent housing stock, not dilapidated old properties. But in terms of buying your own house, we want people to build more houses, but we want them to build them in the right way. We don't want them built on greenfield first. We want to see brownfield sites filled in first before we build on the green. The only way we can do that is not by supporting the developers, the Tory developers that are making money from us. No, we want the developers to work for us. We want also enough housing stock to be set aside for affordable homes, whether that be housing association, council stock, or affordable homes people to buy straight off. But it has to be more of a balance. Getting away with only building 12% affordable housing in a new estate is unacceptable, and the developers are making a huge profit at our expense. 50% housing stock local authorities could choose to do, and they could choose to put 50% to housing association and 25% to council homes. And that's something we'd like to encourage. We'd like to encourage more local authorities to build more council homes.
Thank you. I certainly agree on the agency point. I'd also say that we need landlords to be ethical. Most are, but some aren't, and to be properly regulated. I absolutely agree with my Labour colleague that we need more housing in general, and we certainly need more affordable housing. Now, our Tory colleague asked, where do they go? And I'll be honest with you, we've had a difficult decision. I had a difficult decision to make, and my colleagues did, in my ward in Barwell in Bosworth, where it was proposed for 2,500 more houses, about half a village again. And the reason that in the end, after some serious thought, I backed that and indeed successfully proposed it, and it has to be said that was on greenfield land. It's going to be over the next 15 to 20 years or so, is because my village is very impoverished, and it's going to bring in about £12 million worth of inward investment into my village, a new health centre, a new school, new shops, improvement to the village centre. Now, it's been hugely controversial, that has, and indeed maybe the political death of me in May. And I'm perfectly honest about that, and I'm very busy knocking on doors. In fact, that's probably where I should be now, really. But the reason that I did back it was because of the inward investment and improvements that it's going to bring into my village. But was I really happy about it being on greenbelt land? No, I wasn't, but we're getting to the point where, that is going to be increasingly happening more and more because there's nowhere else to build these houses.
Anybody got supplementary questions on housing? Social housing? Anybody got any sort of experience that they want to share? Yes.
I think we've got the groups. So you spoke about the two groups, which are the landlords, effectively, or people owning their own homes, and the tenants. We've got the homeless, and secondly, do you think building more homes will solve the homeless problem? Sort of thirdly, linked, and actually linked back to the child and adolescent mental health problem, the spending there. And the gentleman from the Green Party covered it slightly. There are deeper rooted causes that cause child and adolescent mental health. spending on the NHS is kind of a sticky plaster. I'm kind of linking that to homelessness as well, which I think is a big issue, which I'd be interested to know what people thought was the solution.
Who would like to start on homelessness?
Maybe, yes, yeah. Maybe sort of more funding for projects like this and sort of social action projects, I suppose, is the way forward. I don't think any of the parties have made any attempts to help homelessness. I think that's probably a shame. I suppose we're all sitting here sort of racking our brains, quickly trying to think of what announcements have come out of conference or what briefing papers we've been sent, and I think the truth is probably we've not been sent anything. And maybe we've just found a gap in all of our 2015 policy pledges, but I think maybe supporting more social action charities and getting the third sector to help is probably the way forward.
I think one of the key things with when you look at sort of social housing is the fact we've sold off so much of it, and that money didn't go into building more social housing, which would have made a bit of sense. It just went to the Exchequer and they just used it to pay off the debts or bail out the banks. And at the end of the day, that's why we are where we are now, is that a lot of the council housing has been sold on the cheap, and now we've got none of it left. And then what do you know? We've got nowhere to put people. It's not a coincidence. And obviously the banks are doing nicely out of it, but I don't want to go on about them too much. I'll be a one-track record.
So each of you, what pledges do your party give in relation to the provision of more social housing, and where do you see that coming from, so that we can believe that that isn't an empty pledge, because it's something that is very, very much close to the hearts of everybody who lives or works here, is where you go when you have to leave here and move on, and social housing is the obvious choice. Can we have something that answers to that? Paul?
I'm going to start because I don't know the policy, I'm afraid, but I could find out for you and then get back to you. Sorry, back to you. Can I continue a little bit from there? I think in homelessness you need a multi-agency approach, because I know that, as was mentioned earlier, there is a lot of third sector involvement with homelessness. In faith groups, I know there's a lot of work going on, but I think they probably need to be linked. It's easy to be in a cycle of homelessness. You have to break the cycle. But then even when you've broken it, I've seen it myself, when someone gets a flat, something happens, a fight happens, as in this case it happened, and then he loses the accommodation. So it does require quite a lot of resource, and we'll have to see where that came from, but I think a very good source of resource is the third sector, but how that works together with other multi-agencies.
I think, to be fair, I think partly down to is kind of one of these things where the council need to be given more powers to build housing that's specifically for social need. And I think one of the key things to kind of remember is that the reason some people, not all, but some people end up being homeless is because they had a job, they had a house, but the financial crisis has hit them so hard, and there is so little assistance out there. And I know Paul mentions about agencies and different things like the job centre and all that working together, but for the most part of it, if you look at a lot of the articles and a lot of stuff, that they're more focused on persecuting these individuals as opposed to actually sitting there and helping them out. So while I do agree with that we need a multifaceted approach and trying to look at all these things in different ways, I think we need to kind of be a bit realistic and say actually things like austerity and stuff like that have hit people a lot harder than they ever imagined it would. And we just need to kind of hold our hands up, all collectively, regardless of what party we're with, and say things like this don't work for society, they're making things worse. Whether you're homeless, whether you're a billionaire, you're just as much of an asset to this country, and we need to recognise that we need to do things about it. So we need to give councils more powers to build housing and social. The central government needs to do more in terms of building houses too.
Thank you. I can only speak really about Hinckley and Bosworth, but we've certainly just started building more council houses. Now, it takes time, but we are making a start. And I think although the Tory Thatcher policy in the 80s of allowing people to buy their council houses was popular at the time, if you look at the damaging effect that it's had, because the provision just, it was great that people could buy their own homes, and in that respect it was great, but in terms of social housing provision, it just decimated it. And you know, I think local councils across the country are only now realising that they need to start building up their council housing stock. And as I say, nuclear positives, we have made a start to that, but it's going to take a long time.
Yeah, that's an interesting point my colleague makes actually, because something I just thought of. Not all authorities have a housing stock. Some of them have transferred their housing stock to a social housing provider. So there are quite large social housing providers in Leicestershire. One of them, I'm not sure that they're in Leicester, is 7 Locks, but there's a whole list of them. And there's also a system, something that's used in Harbour District Council, of choice-based letting. And that is a route through onto the social housing register with, if you like, a needs assessment that then will place you in a position in that register for housing. So I think there's a balance to be had. The social housing providers, just for this piece of information, they have boards that are made up of the residents and local politicians, local elected officials. So there's a bit of check and balance there in exactly how the social housing provider is, what quality they're providing. But they are separate from control of local authority. If that's a model that works, only where it works, then that might be something that could help the situation.
Anybody else got anything they want to say on housing? Yes.
What impact is your party going to have on homelessness, and like, why is it different for normal people to come in and get housed? It's shorter time and it's a lot longer for someone to get rehoused if they're in a wheelchair. Why is that?
What was that? It takes long to get rehoused if you're in a wheelchair?
I've been waiting 3 years.
Yeah, I mean, just going from my experience in the system, it's a long wait for... Are you a single male?
Yeah.
Without family, I think it's a long wait for single males, full stop. Doesn't make it right. It's just how you know, there's not a lot out there, and it goes back to the reasons we're talking about. These are long-term things. You know, houses aren't built in a couple of months. It's got to be planned, and they've got to put things down. But for me, and this probably isn't UKIP policy, but as soon as you start selling off your social housing, if you don't replace it, you're going to have a problem 4 or 5 years down the line. And that's exactly where we've got. You know, and that's why you've got so many people rushing to try and get 500 quid 2 up 2 downs down an Arbor Road, because that's all they can afford. And that's becoming the sort of the go-to sort of social housing for the Westminster politicians who've sold off the council houses, is to put you into private renting, and that brings all sorts of separate problems that the Labour lady alluded to, in terms of agencies kicking you out on 2 months' notice or 1 month, 2 months' notice, etc., etc. And so, you know, for me, I'd like to see the regulation of the private sector. Then we might have a better alternative for people like yourself who are going to be low down the council list. Let's be frank, as single males are. I'm a male. That's how it is.